Chapter 17. Pounds of Jewelry. Before the police dog could attack Nancy and Ned, they bounded into the living room, jumped over the back of a sofa that stood cater-cornered to the wall, and dropped to the floor. The furious animal jumped onto the sofa and snarled at them. He did not pounce on the couple, however, apparently afraid of being caught in the narrow enclosure. "Help! Help!" Nancy and Ned shouted at the top of their lungs. Suddenly, the man at the front door called out, "This is your last warning!" The big dog, meanwhile, had jumped off the sofa and tried to crawl underneath it in order to get at Nancy and Ned. He succeeded only part way, but kept snarling at the trapped couple. "Help!" Nancy cried out again. "But be careful! There's a vicious dog in here!" Just then her father came running down the stairway in his bathrobe and slippers. He carried a stout cane. As Mr. Drew reached the last step, the stranger, who stood in the doorway, commanded, "Don't interfere!" Nancy's father paid no attention. He turned on the ceiling light in the living room and approached the sofa. At the same moment, Hannah Gruen appeared from the kitchen, also wearing a bathrobe and slippers. In one hand she held a broom, in the other a bucket of water. Nancy suddenly remembered her pet. Frantically she called out, "Where's Togo?" "Up in your room waiting for you," Hannah replied. "I shut the door so he can't get out." The unfriendly German shepherd had started to back out from under the couch. Hannah whacked him with the broom, and as soon as the dog's head appeared, she threw the bucket of water into his face. The animal yelped in pain from the whacks, and his owner whistled for him. Willingly, the defeated attacker ran from the house. Ned pushed the sofa forward and hurried after him to the door. The visitors had already left in a car. The lock had been broken, but with Mr. Drew's help, Ned managed to nail it shut. Then they pushed the sofa back into place. In the meantime, Nancy had emerged from her hiding place and thanked Hannah for taking care of Togo, who was barking wildly upstairs. "Shouldn't we report this to the police?" Nancy asked her father. "The dog might be a clue to who the stranger was." "Yes, that's a good idea. Call right away." Nancy spoke to the officer on duty and asked if he had a record of large German shepherds owned by the residents of River Heights. "Yes, we do have a list from the License Bureau. I'll phone each owner and find out where his dog has been," he promised. 20 minutes later, he called back. "Every German shepherd in town was indoors during the time when the vicious dog entered your home," he reported. Nancy thanked the officer and decided that the voice and the vicious dog had come from out of town. She mentioned this to her father, and she remarked, "The stranger certainly is well protected." Late the next afternoon, she and Ned dressed for Mr. Moto's farewell party. Since Nancy did not know where Mrs. Rossmeyer's house was, she decided to call Mr. Kikichi. "Mrs. Rossmeyer is at home?" he inquired, amazed. "I guess so," Nancy replied. "She invited me to come and see her. Have you heard from Mr. Moto?" "No." This answer puzzled Nancy, but she did not tell Mr. Kikichi that the party was supposed to be in his friend's honor. She got directions and thanked the man. On the way to Mrs. Rossmeyer's, Nancy and Ned discussed the situation. "It's over my head," Ned confessed. "Tell me your thoughts." "There is a possibility Mr. Moto has not been kidnapped, but instead has chosen to go into hiding," Nancy said, but she did not sound convincing. But if this is so, why hasn't Mr. Kikichi been invited to the party? Ned asked. Not only that, Nancy said, but just before Mr. Moto disappeared, he told us that he had never met Mrs. Rossmeyer. If the party is really in his honor, she must have been introduced to him after that. Ned added, and perhaps he told her about you. That's why you were invited. Could be, Nancy agreed thoughtfully, but I still think this is all very strange. I do too, Ned said, and so does your father. He gave me a bunch of keys in case Mrs. Rossmeyer is in league with the crooks and tries to lock us up in her estate. He pulled out 2 rings with master keys on them. You take one and I'll take the other. Your dad felt they might come in handy. Good idea. Nancy smiled and put the key ring into her evening bag. Dad thinks of everything to protect me. She smiled at her companion. And you do pretty well yourself at the same job. She quickly added, to cover any embarrassment he might feel, I'm suspicious of those numbers we were told to use for identification. I wonder what it's about. I'm with you. Suppose I say number 12 and escort to the doormen. I'd like to avoid 13. That's a good idea, Ned agreed. And please stay close to me. Together we'll be safer if any funny business is going on. It was almost dark when they reached the road to which Mr. Kikichi had directed them. It was narrow, rutted, and looked like a lane through the woods, rather than the entrance to an elegant estate. As they drove along, Ned remarked, Mrs. Rossmeyer must like privacy, unless Kikichi is sending us in the wrong direction. Just then, however, the house came into view. Many cars were parked near the brightly lighted entrance. He didn't, Nancy chuckled, and there's really a party going on. Now I feel better. So do I, Ned said, as he positioned his car in such a fashion that they could make a quick getaway if necessary. Then the couple walked up to the house. They could see people through the windows and paused to look at them. About half were American, the other half Asiatic. All wore evening clothes, but many of the outfits were so outlandish that Ned whispered, They're dressed as if they're going to a Halloween party. And look at that jewelry. There must be tons of it, Nancy said. She was astonished at the gems the women were wearing. After studying necklaces, Nancy suddenly realized that so far as she could judge from the distance, every one contained 25 pearls. Like Mrs. Rossmeyer's stolen piece, there was a large center pearl with 12 smaller ones on each side. The center pearl differed with each necklace. Some were white, others gray. Many were blue, a few were rose-colored, and 3 of them were black. Nancy pointed out her discovery to Ned. There certainly must be some significance to that, she said in a barely audible voice. Perhaps we shouldn't go in, Ned suggested. How about reporting the party to the police? By the way, the man who called you said it was a surprise. Well, I'd say it is. Nancy nodded, but insisted they go in. I have a feeling we're on the verge of making a big discovery, and I don't want to back out now. He finally agreed, and the two went up a few steps to a large, open veranda. From there, they walked to the front door. It was opened by a man in a red velvet uniform. He looked at the couple and put out an arm as if to stop them. To allay any suspicion on his part, Nancy smiled and said, I am number 12, and this is my escort. The doorman stared at her, and she and Ned held their breaths, wondering what would happen next. End of chapter 17.